Okay, we ready? Okay. Welcome everybody to our third program in our lecture series. I'm Patricia Harine. I'm the president of the History House Board. We were lucky enough to get a grant through the, I have to be right in front of here if I picture won't be. Get a grant from the Davis Family Foundation to fund this. We've scheduled programs almost every other week or twice a month actually, because we have to spend the grant money before the end of September. So that's our timeline to do this. The first and the second program, for those of you who are new to the lecture tonight, are on our website. So if you want to go to skowheganhistoryhouse.org, you can easily find lecture series at the top, go to the bottom, and they will see that you can click on and see James Francis, who presented the first time since place, and Darren Ranko, who presented a couple of weeks ago. So welcome. I hope you enjoy the program. Susan?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm going to see if I'm in the picture here. Just a second. I'm a little taller. Patricia and I started this partnership about 3 years ago because of what was going on with the Indian mascot here in town. And we decided that we wanted for ourselves more education about Wabanaki history and culture. And Patricia in particular wanted this to come from the History House. So we were referred to John Bear Mitchell and Darren Ranko, who teach at UMO, and they became our partners and basically our bosses. And we wanted all of the speakers to be Wabanaki, have the voices come all from Wabanaki people. And they were able to guide us in decisions about what kinds of subjects we would do, who the best speakers would be for those subjects, and opened those doors for us by giving us all the contacts and kind of smoothing the way for us. So they were essential partners for us. And one of the things that came up right at the beginning was that I called Darren and said, what do you, these talks, by the way, are being given on this island in the middle of the Kennebec River that was a primary fishing site for the Wabanaki people that lived along this section, that lived all along the Kennebec River. And I said, Darren, how should we do this land acknowledgement? And he said, we prefer that you guys have a conversation and develop a purpose for acknowledging this place as a place where people lived for 12,000 years. And so we consider these meetings the beginnings of those conversations to sort of see where we're all going to go with all of the information that we're going to be giving. And this is a long conversation. It's like a course in Wabanaki history and culture, which is a great gift to all of us. So tonight, John Bear has come. He's one of our two guides in this endeavor. And he's a citizen of the Penobscot Nation from Indian Island in Maine. He's here with his granddaughter, which is great. Currently he's the UMaine System Coordinator of Native American Waiver and Educational Programs. He's also the coordinator of the UMaine Wabanaki Center Outreach and Student Development, as well as a lecturer in Wabanaki and Multicultural Studies at UMO. He's served on many museum and educational boards whose missions are focused on Maine's Wabanaki people and the educational curriculum. For years, he's visited the schools as a Maine touring artist for the school arts and education program. And he's toured with Native American Storytellers of New England. His award-winning singing and storytelling can be heard in multiple places: PBS, independent films, HBO, and many documentaries focused on Wabanaki or Maine's indigenous peoples. So we're really lucky to have him here tonight. So this is John Bear.
Good evening. Chimon Muswal Nataliwi, Skijinawadu, Donawapskig Naniljaya, the Dilda Bamwa Kamui, Nagakakagus, Ijibali Dadameli Skijinawi, Ijibali Dadam, Gizi Skijinwadwi. My name in English is John Bear Mitchell. My name in my language is Chimon Muswan. I'm from an island in the Penobscot River. We refer today as Indian Island, but it was originally known as the People's Island. It was our governmental and ceremonial headquarters, wasn't necessarily our village site. And I'm just proud that I grew up hearing my language and was able to be part of my life. And to the point where I think that the land where we go needs to hear it again. The rocks out there, they understood us first. You know, the water that flows over them has passed by probably many times, has heard our language longer than they've heard French or English or German or whatever languages that were spoken on these shores after contact time. So I always like to just, if I'm outside, I talk to the ground and the rocks first, and then I talk to people second. Because I just think that it would make it happy, make the earth happy just hearing an old language. You know, going home, you can be homesick in your own home. You can sit there and you can be homesick. And am I getting in trouble right now?
No, you're not. Just gonna tilt the screen sideways for you.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
You're trying to get angles. That look like hell. I got the 4 o'clock this morning. Oh, this is a church thing, right? Whoops. Heck. Yeah, I got up at 4 o'clock this morning and left St. Petersburg, Clearwater, St. Pete. I don't know where I was. And got home at about 11 and slept for an hour. Susan called me 5 times, 5 or 6 times while I was sleeping. So if you hear about some fiery wreck on the way home, her fault. Just kidding. It would be her fault. But I think, I come from a place where stories are important. And so tonight we're talking about stories and teachings within those stories. I could talk about anything. I've been teaching Wabanaki studies now at the collegiate level for 22 years and in a K-8 school for 8 years. And I'm the only one that's been doing that. So Skowhegan has a place in my heart, actually. And where is she? You over here? Yeah. Yeah. Bonnie, years and years and years ago.
Oh, not that.
Years and years. I can tell you it was between 1992 and 1996. That's forever ago. You know, kids were born and they're in college now. That's a long time ago. Let's just admit it. You know, many crops have come and go, many a storm. So I was hired down here at the middle school. In fact, it was the old middle school. And then later on when the new one was built, I think it went 1 year over there, but to do arts and education with the kids. And we did quite a bit of programming among all disciplines. That's one of my main drives in my life, is to teach Native studies in everything: math, science, English, not just history, because history doesn't talk about we're still here, and we are, and we'll strive and be here. We will. The more challenges we face, the stronger we get, actually, and because we develop stronger allies, and that's what's really important for us. So when we talk about stories, we can talk about stories in many different. How long do we have now? 2 hours. We'll try to keep it to an hour-ish. So 8:15-ish. But and then I'll have you ask questions if you want after. And same with on here. I know there's some chats on here. I'm not going to click on them yet because when I'm storytelling, I'm going to actually tell a couple stories. I just don't take questions. We don't break up stories like that. We'll talk about that after if that comes up. Okay. So you can see the chats. Okay, good. So when we talk about stories, there's different methods and different elements in stories which we can talk about. But do we always talk in the middle? Do we always jump in the middle of stories? Do you always jump in the middle of the river? Can you jump in? No, you have to gradually get there, right? You have to get to the shore and you have to put your foot in the water. You can try to jump as far as you want, but you're not going to go very far. But within storytelling, your goal is to cross that river and then cross it again and cross it again. And you're bringing other people on that trip with you. I'm not necessarily a storyteller who wants you to really acknowledge me, because in our stories, you have to acknowledge them, the stories and the elements of the stories. And I'm just apparently a good relayer of stories in a lot of ways, and very theatrical ways, which we'll be doing with Portland Ovations next year, and with the Native American Storytellers of New England, and all the storytelling things that I've been on, very theatrical, very staged. It can still evoke a lot of emotion. It can still evoke a lot of learning, because our storytellers are our teachers. They taught us the things we needed to know. They taught us everything that existed with a purpose. They taught us that we need to keep those stories going, because if you're a prolific listener of stories, you're putting stories to a sad demise. You also have to tell them those stories. And so I'm going to start out by telling you the story of the first storyteller. You didn't even know there was one. You were just thinking, everybody's starting. No. See, that's why I'm here. That's why she woke me up 3 times calling me. Because you have to understand that these stories really teach us a lot about our morals and values. And when we talk about our morals and values, we can't say morals and values to our students in schools today. We can't. Well, we can in college, but we can't say it in the K-12 arena, because some parents get very upset. That's my job. That's my job to teach morals and values. Well, in everything we learn, there's morals and values. There's lessons in the hallway that consist of morals and values. So we just teach them it, but we don't say it. And so people on the computer, don't tell anybody. There's 19 of you. Well, probably 18 counting me, and probably 17 counting him, because he's watching on the computer. He's not really with us. But these morals and lessons are very intertwined in sort of stories that tell us about the land. My family comes from here. My family comes from the Norwich Walk area. My family was in 2 massacres. We have stories of that. We have names of those family members. We still suffer that historical trauma that they suffered. It's passed down to us. It's in our bodies. It's in our blood. It's in our DNA. We know how historical trauma and intergenerational trauma is passed through biologically through families now. In a very medical sense, it's very real. And we suffer that still. And that's why this place is very important to me and my family. And it really is nice to come down here and feel like I'm welcome back home, instead of being told I'm an outsider and I need to leave. When my family, reason they don't live here is because we were massacred. And we were driven away on what we call the Old Indian Trail, Route 43. And so these stories teach us about that history. These stories teach us about the land, the rocks, the water, why this hill exists, why that river flows that way, why those coves, islands exist. It teaches us about the creation of these places. It also teaches us about why animals look the way they do. We all think they're cute. You know why we think they're cute? Because the Creator gave us the ability to see the cuteness, so we protect those animals. Then they get older and they get ugly and we eat them, I guess. But the point is that, you know, we always like the little animals, right? And you know, we have to protect them. And so these stories tell us about those animals and their purpose in their lives. It teaches us about why there are what we call you know, albino animals too, completely white animals, anomalies. We don't see them much, but all these tribes, you know, they get all, you know, in a state of reverence when they see them. Well, there's a real reason for that. There's a real valid reason. And I'm not going to tell you what it is, but no, I'll tell you next week. But when an animal gives its life so that we can live, we believe that that animal can come back, be born again into another body. And when they do that, they put themselves on a pattern of giving their bodies so that we can survive. Over and over, they do it. And eventually the Creator says, enough. You've done enough. And you got one more life. And you're going to live that life to the end, from birth until death of natural causes. And so that nobody hunts you, you'll be completely white. And if a hunter does take a completely white animal, the hunter suffers the Creator's law, whatever that handout may be. And it's really important to understand in these mini lessons like this, the importance of life and the importance of survival and death. And that even the plants have life. They can't escape. They are cute when they're little stalk of corn, right? Little shoot of bean sprout, you know, they're also cute. We even think plants are cute. And then they grow really big and we eat them. They can't even escape. They have a lesser of a chance. Or we pull pieces off and we eat them. We don't feel as bad about it sometimes because they don't have the eyes. They don't have the face we can connect with, the familiarity, but it's the same thing. If something gives itself up or lives its life so that we can purposefully, so that we can survive. And we need to acknowledge little things like that. And that's what the stories do. They teach us about these important things that really play into our survival and our existence. Chibalok was the first storyteller. Chibalok was an old man. He was not only an old man, but he was an old man whose children have passed on. He outlived his children. He outlived his I hate to say this word because it's not, it's sort of kind of a economical boundary to it today, but wife. But we have another way we say it, it kind of translates into a spiritually bound person. And it doesn't have to be a man or a woman. It can be man, man, woman, woman, or man, woman, or woman, man. You know, whenever you go to the bathroom, you see that sign, guys, that says, whoa, man, don't go there. Go the other way. So these important lessons again. But Chibalok was the first storyteller. And he was old. You know, he'd wake up in the morning and he didn't even care if he had to comb his hair. Why comb his hair? He's not looking for anybody. He doesn't need another partner. He doesn't want another relationship. No need to look good. We comb our hair. I mean, sometimes it feels good, you know, sometimes we wake up and it's like, why bother? I'm going to be working all day. I don't need to look good. And so just walking his life, walking his path. And he gets up every morning before anybody else. And he lived outside the main village in this one particular place. And in the mornings, kids and adults also would like just come down and get a lesson from him. They'd come down and get a lesson. They'd hear a story. Every one of you can hear a story. Some of you will picture that story in your mind as a live action film. The animals are really doing this stuff. The people are. Some of you will picture it as an animation. It's a cartoon in your mind. It's played out that way. Others won't even think of it. They'll just hear it. They won't feel it. There's a difference between hearing a story and feeling a story. It's really important to understand. You have to learn to be a good listener of storytelling. It's not natural in our generations of humans that are here now. And that takes practice. Chebelak was really good at getting people to hear the stories and feel the stories. The young ones, they feel them more. As we get older, we hear them more. And the good storytellers, as we get older, make us feel them as well. And that's a real important aspect of storytelling. Chebelak had it nailed down. He had a stump at the bottom of that little hill that he lived behind that blocked the sound of the village. High pine trees were there. Kids would come, adults would come, they'd sit on that hill in front of him and they would listen. Some would bring their breakfast down, a little piece of a corn cake or, some dried up meat or pemmican or something. They'd just come down and nibble on something as they're listening to him before they start their day. We never stopped our teachings seasonally, never happened. There were certain stories we didn't tell in certain seasons, but we never stopped our teachings. Storytelling went on year round in the Wabanaki tradition. Every story that could be told was told because education doesn't stop. History, lessons, values, spirituality doesn't stop, has to be heard constantly. So Chebelak always told stories. There was a stump at the bottom of the hill, like I was saying, where he could just kind of lean against it with his butt. And he had perfectly dug holes where his feet went into the ground, his heels kind of dug in. He'd sit there, it was so comfortable. It's like a chair that hugs you when you sit in it. We all have those chairs. We made them that way. It took time. And so he would sit there, leaning up against his stump, arms crossed across his chest, and he'd wait for the people to come. And when he felt there was enough people there, or he felt that it was time for him to tell the story, he'd tell the story, whatever the story was. It was generation after generation after generation of people that had listened to him. Chebelak forgot to die. He forgot to go, what we say is, to the other side of camp. Because he felt like his mission was so important. Nobody was carrying it on. He needed to be that catalyst. Why would you leave this earth when everything you truly believe in, with your mind and your heart, why would you leave this earth if nobody's doing what you feel is important in your life? Nope, stick around till you find one or two people that will make it sort of the thing that you feel it is. And then you'll go from there. Chebelak, he wasn't going to let it go. I need to teach other storytellers, he said. I need to do this. So one day, people went down and he wasn't there. Kids ran back home and they were asking their grandparents, hey, did you ever see this? And they were saying, no, it's unusual. Chebelak's always there. These old people, they said, my grandparents and their grandparents always talked about how he was always there. He never was not there. He was just there. You just expect it. The road's always in front of you. And as you go down it, the road's always behind you too. And it'll be there for your next journey. And Shabaloc was that road. He was that thing that took you to a place that you could look forward to and you could look back on. And you could do it again and again. But he wasn't there. So the kids were talking amongst each other, young men and women, early teens. They noticed on his wigwam, which means house in our language, that his door flap was still closed. Well, I knew he didn't come out that morning because the whole reason we have those door flaps and the whole reason our houses face the east is because when we, you know how it gets in the summertime, even here, it gets cool inside. You open that door and the sun comes in first thing and warms that inside of that lodge. And so they knew he was still in there. And the worst fear among the kids, like, I'm not going in there, you go in. I'm not going in, you go in. One young boy went down. He said, I'm all I know is I can run faster than him. And I'm content that I can do this. He was kind of scared because Shabaloc was a curmudgeon. He was not like a very person on person. He was more of a, I'm talking, you listen person. And so the boy went down and he banged, boom, boom, boom on the side of Shabaloc's house. He didn't hear anything. He's like, uh-oh. Boom, 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 he banged again. And he could hear a little bit of a rustling. He said, whew, I'm not gonna have to be the one to find him. As he crossed over, I'm not gonna have to be the one to look and go tell everybody. And he heard this voice. Hey, Gosh. Chkwe. Abin. Hey, son. Come in and sit down. And so the boy opened the flap and he went in. And the boy said, Grandfather, why are you not out telling stories? He said, oh, Gosh. Zik dasen Gosh. I'm tired. I'm tired, he kept saying. Zik dasen Gosh. I'm tired, son. And the boy said, well, Grandfather, rest today. Get some rest. And Grandfather said, yeah, let me tell you, he said. So I was laying here last night, he said. And I got to thinking that all my work to maintain this important message of storytelling, of our history, of our future, of our spirituality, of our way of life is just me repeating myself over and over and over, and nobody's saying it back to me. And I'm getting tired of it. I want people to say it back to me so they can acknowledge what they heard. Because sometimes when you say it back, it goes deeper into your mind and your heart. You understand it better. They don't say it back. Goes. Zik das. Tired. Oh. So what do you want to do, Grandfather? Well, I got to thinking. Go tell everybody that you can, even pass it up to the next village and the lower village or inland villages, that I got one more important story to tell tomorrow. It's so important. I want everybody who can be here to be here. And everybody who comes has to take what I tell them, take that message to the people that couldn't come. So the boy said, okay, Grandfather. I will take that message. I'll deliver it. I'll make sure everybody gets the word out. And we'll see how many people show up tomorrow. So they did. They put that word out that day that Shabaloc, he wants everybody who can be here tomorrow to be here. He's got a very important message to tell. Well, that day, it was a little quieter among the villages. Sort of like that, that kind of way in which people address you like, hey, I need to talk to you. I got something really I want to talk to you about. Let's schedule it for 3 more days. And you wonder that whole time. You stress that whole time. You think of it when you wake up in the middle of the night before you go to bed, and when you wake up in the morning, and when you go in the bathroom, and when you're having your coffee, and when you're driving down the road. You think of it because you don't know what it is. It's ominous. It's a mystery. Doesn't feel good. But that next morning, they went down to the stump. Many people came, hundreds of people came. Spellock was amazed. And he said, you know, I'm glad you're here. He said, I got to tell you something, he said. Very important. I'm tired. I've been around way too long. I should be up there walking that stars, that web with my ancestors, with my family. I sat in my house, a house I am so comfortable in, a house I'm so familiar with. I know every sound, every place, every corner. And I look out and I don't recognize anybody. I don't recognize this anymore as very welcoming to me. Instead, the place has changed around me and I'm homesick in my own home. I feel very alone, very pushed away, very unimportant. And I know that's me. But it's also because I didn't really focus enough on teaching the young ones respect for their elders, checking in like my ancestors did, when they would have one person a day check in on an elder. They would take turns. One person every 2 weeks would have to check in on an elder somewhere that day. Bring them some food, sit down and talk with them. We don't do that anymore, he said. And I'm alone, and it's part of my fault because I didn't teach those teachings, so I expected it. And I was so determined to expect it that I didn't teach it. And it got away from us. I realized I'm part of that problem. I'm part of my own homesickness. I need to go home. And it's not this physical place. It's with my people. It's with that circle I love that left. I'm leaving you with instructions, he said. Every one of you that's sitting here in front of me right now, imagine every story you've ever heard in your entire life as a lightning bug. Some bright, some dim, almost ready to go out, and some in the middle. Because every story that I ever tell or you've ever heard is that light that's flying around all your heads right now. Every one of those stories wants you to take it, borrow it from the sky above your head, bring it into your mind and tell it. And when you're done telling it, let it go. And it burns bright again. Those stories that are not told, they're dim. And sometimes they go out. Poof. They're gone. Those stories will never be heard ever again. They can never be revived. They can never be relayed. They're gone. All because we don't take the time to tell those stories. And each one of those stories is a person with feelings and hope and desire to live on. Every time you tell one, you give it new brightness, you give it new light. I wish I could say every story above us right now is something so bright, but over half of them are fading. Some are just ready to go out. There's no way I can tell them in my lifetime to even give them any more brilliance. These stories can be about your family, he said. Stories can be about you, adventures you took, that you hold so dear, that you would like to relay. Stories could be about our whole tribe, or about the animals or the land. These stories are very important. They're all important. When we start to think nobody wants to hear that, we purposely are then killing something that wants to live, because we're making a determination that we don't have the spiritual right to determine. He said, so I'm leaving you today. I'm going to the other side of camp. I'm going to be a messenger, he said. I'm going to carry a message. And that message that I'm going to carry is the actual answer to your question. And as he was talking, he started to fade away into this translucent sort of figure. People could see through him. And he became light in itself. And he started to almost float, became buoyant. And as he was talking, they could see he was taking the shape of an eagle, a white eagle, the spirit of the eagle, which actually made sense, because how we say the spirit of an eagle in our language is Chibala. And it was understood then to him that he was finally fulfilling his mission. He had handed his story of himself to his people. And he also instructed them to tell the stories in their own way, because every storyteller is different. Don't try to think you're a bad storyteller because you don't sound like this one or you don't sound like that one. Tell the story because you can tell the story. And those words, once they're done being spoken, will be a brighter light all above us for somebody else to share at some other point. Jabelaki was saying that, when you ask for something in your prayers at night, it might be a while before I can deliver it to you, but when I do, it'll come in my talents and I'll come in your dreams. And if you turn from me when I try to hand you your answer, I will go away and I will never bring your answer back. Never turn from me. Always accept me. Never flinch. I can't hurt you. And ever since that day, we asked Jabelak for answers to our prayers. But his final instruction, as he was going away, was to say to everybody that you don't need to just pray to say, I need something. You can pray to say, thank you. Chmitaux, woolly one, Creator, thank you for letting me wake up. Creator, thank you for letting me lay my head down tonight on my soft pillow. Creator, thank you for putting people around me that mean something, that don't just want something from me, but want to be with me. It's okay to do that. And he said, balance what you need with celebration of what you have. And that's the story of the first storyteller. And if you really listen to that story, if you did, I mean, my God, it's almost 10 of 8. Sorry. We'll have to be back. No, I'll take another trip and come back. But if you really listen to that story, that everybody that's sitting here, the 30 people in front of me and the 20 people online, you're going to all walk away with a little bit of a different sort of message. You'll all grab onto something that's meaningful to you. It's not me. It's the words of our teachings that do that to you. Like I said, I'm just a conveyor of those words, and apparently I can do it in a way that works, from what I'm told, in this kind of a venue. That story of Chibelok is not a story we're supposed to write. It's not a story that was actually taken outside of ceremony until about 25 years ago. I grew up with that story as a very sacred story in the ceremony. Don't leave that ceremony. But the two elders who taught me as a child growing up, when I fasted my 2 days in the summer, my 2 days in the fall, my 2 days in the winter, then again in the spring of that same calendar year, well, 4 seasons, told me that I would carry that story and to share that story because it's important. And they like the way I share the story. Take it outside because other people need it. It's medicine. It heals. It feels. And it's important. So I take that story and I share that with you and you here as well. And hope that it gives you some happiness, contentness, and something to think about, because there's a lot to it. There's a lot to our ego. There's a lot to our purpose. And we need to have ego to a certain point, and we need to have purpose in a larger scale. And we need to build excitement of those purposes with the younger generations so that they can carry them on. And, we're working with young storytellers right now. Actually, they're in an application process. We want 15 of them, and we want to bring them up. We want women and men to tell the stories. Right now, there's a lot of male storytellers. We want our balance back. We don't get the right nutrition spiritually if we don't have that balance of the feminine and the masculine spirits, not the feminine and the masculine in the way we look at it biologically. So it's really important to understand. So that being said, Chibelok taught us a lot about really our walk in life and how we're supposed to do that, and the stories that are important. And they all contain an element of gluskab or gluskabe, as you might have heard this person called. But gluskab appears as a male in our eyes. But actually, the name means the perfect balance of the feminine and the masculine spirit. And when Christianity came to our villages, gluskab became known as the liar. So you'll see books called Gluskab the Liar. Gluskab is the liar. They're titled like that. But that was an influence. The owl in some native traditions. Oh, it's very bad to see an owl. Don't go in the woods. Who? You. Owls are good. Our chief's headdresses are made from owl feathers. Why? Because owls are very protective and wise and watchful. They can see the deviance in people and other animals, and they can react to it. So to make our chief's headdress out of owl feathers symbolizes what they're supposed to be doing in their role. Protecting, watching, being part of, alerting, being strong, as they can be. They're human. So all these things that are very important to us became something different to scare us away from it during conversion. And so, but we held on to these stories. So I would be remiss if I did not talk about gluskab before I take questions. Gluskab refers to the man from nothing. In other words, he wasn't here. And then one day he was here before humans. And he was in the shape of a human. he created himself from the dirt that the creator had left when they created this planet. The creator had touched that dirt. Out came an arm, and it reached over and it formed another arm. And these two arms formed the body and the head. And he said, "Here I am." And he was the perfect balance. I say he because we refer to him as a he, but he's the perfect balance of the feminine and the masculine spirit. He held the truth of all the feminine and the truth of all the masculine, which is important and needed. One thing Glooskap could not do is give birth. And that was purposeful on behalf of the creator. So Glooskap was put here with orders and told that you need to watch the animals. You need to observe them. What do they eat? How do they survive in the cold and the heat, in the deep woods and the shores? How do they react around water? He had to observe them. That was his first chore. It went on for many years until he got to know the animals' habits. And by doing that, he learned what to eat and what not to eat. If the animals don't eat it, you should not eat it. If only certain animals eat it, but other animals don't, that have a digestive system similar to yours, like a mammal, you probably shouldn't eat that either. He learned all these intricacies of nature. And then when people came, he shared them. He shared them with us. He taught us what we needed, how to survive, what to eat, what not to eat. You know, we made this canoe 3,000 years ago that today is unchanged in its design. Technology and how it's created and the material in which it's created from is different. But the canoe stayed the same. Could you imagine a culture so full of ingenuity that we make something once and 3,000 years later, people are still using it? That's where the word comes from. Teach that. And so, you know, when 800 years ago, we have tribes south of us still in dugout logs, which serve their purpose. But Glooskap taught us in our stories, that's Glooskap's creation. His was made out of stone. We had a canoe made out of stone that floated perfect. You know, say, how could that happen? Well, we make them out of iron and we land lots of planes on them. And so, yeah, you can make them out of stone too, apparently, because his were, and those were in the stories, are embedded in, but only he could paddle it because you had to be pretty strong to move that through the water. And so Glooskap lived among humans. He made mistakes. He also carried every trait a human has, exemplified 1,000 times more. He was more whiny. He was more egocentric. He was stronger physically, mentally, emotionally when he needed to be. He was challenging. His ego was humongous at times. He had every single trait we all have, you all have. But he really focused a lot on his. And he really kind of put it out there. And it was for us to watch him do that, to say, yeah, no, I don't want to be like that. Do you remember back in high school, all you guys and gals, the one person that would always do everything that nobody else would try? And sometimes you go watch it happen and just go, that was stupid. But it was really cool. I'd never do that. Well, that was Glooskap. He would do things for us so we could learn what not to do. And but he also taught us many good lessons. And he left us because, you know, after a while, your kids grow up. You were a kid that grew up. And for the first maybe year or two, you're out of your parents' house. You might notify them of everything you've done for a couple of years. Like, hey, I did this. I went on this great hike. I ate this great sandwich. I saw this great movie. You know, you tell them a lot. And then after a while, you're just like, I don't have time to tell them. Why would I tell them? We break that bond. We do it. And our parents feel like they're left kicking rocks. They're still interested in you. They held you. Or those people that took care of you, they held you, they kissed you on the forehead. They cared when you went to bed and not feeling good, and they stayed awake, and they went in and checked on you, make sure you're still breathing. You know, they looked at you. They cried later on when you were crying. You didn't see them. You know, that's what this all about. Blue Scub was sort of that person. And he started to feel like he was kicking rocks. We were not asking him questions anymore. We kind of took our own mission, our own life, our own path forward. And we didn't need him as much. So he built a house to the north. He told us to smoke this tobacco mixture. And I'll tell you what's in it, he said. It's blueberry leaves, it's winter mint leaves, it's kinnicknick, it's wild tobacco. The bark that's dried from a red willow, sage, sweetgrass, cedar, all dried and mashed together. And when you light it in your pipe, it makes a very blue smoke. And you blow that smoke straight up. I'll see it wherever I am. I'll come. That means you need my help. Only a couple times did we need his help. But he still is in his place. His house is covered with dirt now. His chimney's full of water. It's Mount Katahdin. It's Blue Scub's house. He still sits inside there, whittling and twiddling his thumbs, wondering when we're going to ask him to come back again to help us. And we haven't yet. And so maybe sometime we need to. But it'll only come with that mixture of tobacco. And so he, like us, felt neglected in life and just went to do his own thing. He made a promise that he'd be there whenever we needed them. If you're ever hungry, it's because you chose to be hungry. What he said to us. You come to me, you can eat. I might not be able to do much for you other than feed you, but that's important. I still love you. I still care about you. You know, and so that's really what Blue Scub is all about. He's the heart of who we are. He cares so much for us. And we acknowledge that in him. But then we have our trickster stories. Because, you know, there's always somebody out there trying to puff out their chest a little bit, try to make themselves out to be a little bit more than who they really are. And we all know who they are. You know who they are. You know that they have a little bit of talent, but not that much. Come on. And for us, it's Espun, the raccoon. My favorite genre of stories to tell. Raccoon stories. And the trickster teaches us a lot in humility, a lot in keeping our hands to ourselves and our mouths to ourselves. I never got in trouble for something I didn't say. The best grasp on any language is knowing when not to say something. And that's really important. Think it. That's all right. That's okay. Wish I did that a couple of times when I was on vacation in the Sunshine State. But trickster stories really tell us a lot about how we should act. You know, more or less on the micro level, because we can all think like Blue Scub wants us to think, or Chibelloch wants us to think. We need to do that. That's important. Get back to that, because that's not just for Indigenous people. That's for everybody. That's for humans. keep those lights glowing, and keep that balance in your life of feminine and masculine. Because one way is not going to help you as much as both will in your life, in your thinking. And then the micro actions of your body throughout the day. If you think of the raccoon, what are they doing the whole time? Absolutely looking for some trouble, something to get into. They're not out there just la-da-da-da-dee, hanging out, going for a hike, getting a gallon of spring water. They're not doing that. They're looking for something to do, and it's mischievous. And we have several stories. I've dug deep, and I found 7. And I've taken those stories and written them into chapters. I intend sometime soon to put out a book of Wabanaki trickster stories. And these things teach us really, the raccoon teaches us more about how we need to kind of carry ourselves. You know, if somebody perceives you as mischievous, you're mischievous. You know, you are. And that's a good trait for a certain point, right? To a certain point, I should say. Is it be mischievous, be a little curious, but not to the point where like you get stuck in a dumpster and you can't lift up the lid. You know, take the lesson in the modern sense. Take it in the traditional sense. Don't challenge a waterfall to a shouting contest. Don't think it's trying to challenge you because it's louder than you could ever be. Don't think that the rain challenges the lakes to see who's the wettest. Or the deciduous and the coniferous trees challenge you to see who's the woodiest. Just let them be. And let them do what they do. They're all individual, they all serve a purpose. So the trickster stories really teach us on that microcosm that, you know, it's okay to inflate a story that you want to tell. You know, you want to tell a story about your trip down the river and you getting caught in the outgoing tide between Verona Island and whatever's on the other side of the river. That channel under the Penobscot Narrows Bridge. I've been stuck in that. Scary as hell. And I got saved. I got rescued. I was a sweep canoe, whitewater canoe guy. And what saved me? A seal. A friggin' seal that I thought was trying to kill me. Pushed me out of danger, pushed my canoe out of danger. You know, and these are the things that animals teach us. You know, that we can always, we're not solely responsible for our own destiny sometimes. We get ourselves into a pickle. I shouldn't have been there. And the next 2 years after that, when we paddled that channel, I wasn't there. I'd go when the tide was level, not ingoing or outgoing, because one year I got stuck in that big whirlpool outside of Fort Knox, and that makes you very dizzy and very nauseous. And it's very scary because I come from the tidy bowl man age. You know, I come from the please don't squeeze the shaman age. Oh, no, wait a minute, it's something different. But anyway, growing up on the island, you make little tweaks to these commercials. But, you know, so these micro teachings that we have, you know, I can inflate my stories a little bit to make them funny or more suspenseful than they really are. That's okay because the action was still there. But not to lie outwardly like the raccoon intends to do. That's why they all look the same. We never know which one lied to us. So we treat them all horribly. Live trap them and relocate them because they all look the same and whatever. But you know, these are really important aspects of our stories. They teach us our history. They teach us our morals, lessons, and our values. And they teach us about the way to hold ourselves in the world. And I hope you get a little bit of a piece of that this talk I'm doing tonight, right now, I do a senior, I used to teach, it's a voluntary thing, senior college, or senior citizens college, and I had Respecting the Elders, a Wabanaki teaching through stories, and as part of it, it's sort of like the introduction level of it, but the introduction level is like 2.5 hours long. So I'm not going there. I got to drive home up since 4. But what I want to do is share a little bit with you about the importance of our stories. And I hope you felt it tonight. I really hope you felt something. And if you didn't, I hope you heard something that's meaningful to you. So maybe for a little bit, we'll take some questions. Are there any chat questions first? If we'll take those, and then we'll go to the live audience.
Yeah, there is one question in the chat. Thomas says, is it considered okay by the Wabanaki people for outsiders to study, list, and accidentally modify their stories?
No, not accidentally modify. Let's just get that right out of the way.
So I'm gonna repeat it just for fun.
So-
I think you have to repeat it better.
Well, they can see it.
Okay, they can see it.
Yeah, so online you can see the question. You guys heard the question. Do not modify our stories. Holy cow. Don't Joe Bruchac us, please. Don't ever Joe Bruchac us. The stories have a very, very deep meaning, and their meanings are ancient, and then not to be toyed with, even by us. I'll change a character in a story. One time there was a rabbit, and I heard that story my whole life through this woman called Molly. We called her Molly Dellis. She was also known as Molly Spotted Elk. But when I was a kid, she used to tell us stories at our school. She'd come across the street from her house. She'd come into our school and tell us stories, old Joe Hemlock stories. And she had this one story. I love this story, and it had a rabbit in it. I thought, even as a kid sitting there, I remember being in 4th grade with my legs crossed, thinking, it'd be so much funnier if it was a weasel. And as I got older, I made it to a weasel. I mean, it doesn't take the integrity of the story away. It just adds a little bit more life in my style of telling stories. I actually am very subdued tonight. I'm not subdued. I'm very hyper, and I would, if this computer wasn't in front of me, I would be moving around, and I would be telling stories in a whole different way. I'm a lot more animated. But it's okay for us to kind of change a character, but the integrity and the message of that character has to be the same. And that's really important, very important. And so it's okay to tell stories, though, that we have, especially if they're published. So if you come across a book and you read a story, tell the story. It keeps us alive. Don't interpret the story. Oh God, don't do that. Don't say, and this is what it means, because then you just ruined it. Let every listener walk away. My great grandfather one time, Francis Ranko, Bunny Ranko, he loved me. He was born in 1901. He loved me. I know he loved me, because when I was born, I'll go 1968, when I was born, I'm 54 years old. He started to take me as an infant to his house for the night or for a weekend. My mother was like, you really want to take him? Go ahead. And he'd take me for a night. He'd take me for a weekend. I grew up in that man's house, in his arms. He loved me, took me fishing, showed me sacred fishing spots, showed me how to make old-fashioned Indian bug repellent. It also worked on keeping humans away from you. And required turpentine to get it off. It was horrible. Nothing would come around you. Bigfoot would be like, damn, that guy smells. I'm out of here. And so he told me one time, when you got in trouble on the island, before you got home, everybody on the street, as you walked up the street, knew about it, and they were looking out the window at you like, And so you had that, you know, had those shifting eyes going as you're walking up the road, you know. And I got to his house. He had they owned a store. And I was like walking by his house and I seen his garage door open, like, oh no, this is his garage. And hey, Gus, Chikwe, my son, come here. Couldn't sneak by him. Can't sneak by somebody on Indian Island. And so I go, yeah, what's up? He goes, sit down, Gus. I've been. So I did. And he goes, you know, there was these two boys. It was a time when they were really, really hungry. The land was hard to find food on. And he said, and these two boys, they're teenagers, 14, 15 years old, they decided, you know what, nobody hunts at night. And there's animals that walk at night that don't walk in the day. We're going to go hunt at night. We'll get a porcupine or raccoon. We don't care what. We were so hungry, we'll eat anything. And so they were walking at night and they were hunting, trying really hard to hunt. Their eyes adjusted and they were hearing animals and they were trying to track them down. And way off on the edge of this field, they saw this little, like, looked like a flickering candlelight at the edge of the field. So they walked over towards it. They were curious, what's over there? And they got there and there was a little house. And they looked inside and it was a one-room cabin and there was a candle on the table just flickering, just burning down. The stump of the candle was almost gone. And on the table, they could see this jar. And in this jar was little pieces of tomasis, which we call fry bread. They look over on the side, and they could see the back of the head of an old man sleeping, and they could see his blanket was going up and down. He was breathing, so sleeping. They saw this other lump next to him, and oh, that must be his old lady. So maybe we could just open this window a little bit and steal just one of those tomasis, just one piece of bread. They're old people, they don't eat much. You know, we could just take two, and that's going to be fine, right? So they put their hands in, he said, and they grabbed the tomasis and they tried to pull it out and they couldn't get their hand out because they were holding the bread. And they were like, well, we'll squish the bread and we'll get our hand out. We don't care how it's shaped. We'll eat whatever. But they still couldn't get their hand out. So the other one said, we got to break the jar. And he said, well, that means we got to steal the whole thing. And they said, well, I guess that's what we got to do. So they got that whole jar and they went out and they were looking around and they saw this white glowing rock under this full moon. And they thought, we'll just smash it gently on that rock. And they went over and they just, dunk, and the glass broke. And the tomasis, the bread, fell onto the ground. They were picking it up and they were brushing it off, blowing it. And what they didn't notice at first was that the rock actually rolled over. And when they were blowing off the bread, they noticed that the rock now was way down. What the heck is this? And they got closer and looked, and it was the old lady. She had gone outside to go take a pee. Now she was dead. Go home. Go home, Gus. Majahagigwag. That's what he said to me. Go home, son. And I was like, what the hell? So I walk up the road kicking rocks. I'm thinking, oh, they were doing something so innocent, so mundane. And they ended up committing an ultimate crime, you know, because it just escalates. Bad behavior escalates. And I got his message because I got kicked out of school that day. And so he had heard about it apparently. As I was walking past his house, he knew about it. So he just told me that story and I was like, oh, okay. So the next day I stopped in and saw him. I said, okay, well, thanks for the story. He said, okay. He said, so he said, speaking of that, he said, you want to make me some tomasis? Because he liked the way I make the fry bread. He said, you make it like the old people. And I said, well, I don't know. Old people taught me how to make it, so I make it like you guys. But yeah, so, you know, there's all these little lessons, there's all these little stories that really come about, as simple as that and as deep as Chabela and as mundane as the trickster or as complicated as Gluska. And it's a spectrum and it's around us. It's not in front of us. It's around us because you know what? Everything I did tonight, I gave life and brightness to many of those stories, some of which get dim because I don't tell them a lot. And that's what we all need to do. So when you tell the stories, if they're written, feel free to tell them. Don't interpret them, don't change them. Tell them. And you can do things with them. If you teach, I would suggest having the students make a prequel or the next chapter in the story, even though they don't exist. Or retell the story through puppets or through a play or something like that. really it's important just to learn how to tell stories and then focus on stories that maybe are meaningful to a student or a person culturally. And that's really important to do as well. So you guys have any questions in the audience? I hope I answered the question on the chat. You guys have any questions here for me? Complaints, comments, dreams, visions, hallucinations that you'd like to share? Yeah, great.
Is the trickster figure, does he appear in other Native American cultures like the jackal? Or the coyote?
Yes, so actually, we wrote a graphic novel a few years ago called Native American Trickster Stories. And this is a bunch of storytellers that got together. And Fulcrum Press put this book out. Now it's in its second edition. But the trickster in the southeast is the alligator. It's the crow in the northwest. It's the coyote in the Midwest and in the southwest regions as well. Every region has different trickster stories. And so the trickster is different regionally. And we had 24 storytellers write trickster stories from their regions. And we have 24 different trickster stories with 24 different tricksters. And so, but it's fun to kind of look at them in a way that sort of encompasses the meaning of the story, because they're all, I mean, how many morals, as humans, morals, lessons, and values are pretty standard. Don't kill, don't steal, be a good human, right? Like every culture has that. Every culture has a method of counting, building, something, or money, or exchange, or everybody has. And so when we listen to these trickster stories, we just need to understand that even though they're entertaining, because they are, is that the lessons pretty much are all the same. They're pretty standard. And it's really neat to see the ways that we can communicate that within the tribes, because out of the 28 language groups, there's 28 very distinct tribal, indigenous people. We're not related. Like we look at Africa, the continent of Africa, we don't say like Egypt is and South Africans are the same people. We don't do that. We look at all the countries on that continent, look at the people as different. But in North America, we look at indigenous people and say they're one people. They're not. We're not. We're 28 distinct cultural groups with different languages, spiritual practices, everything. We all have common history now, obviously, and common goals. And that's all we got as far as relationship goes. So it's really neat to hear their stories and to realize that other indigenous cultures that occupy this enormous piece of land we call North America is incredibly vast, and very thoughtful. In this area, we had wampum law. It's the creator's law. It's a law and consequence. So we got all this going on, but we also have law and consequence because we have to keep peace. There's bad people everywhere. We got to keep them under control. I don't know if I answered your question, but
So Donna, does I know that there's quite a few people who worry about cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that the story has been written in a book. It's okay for us to tell that story.
Yeah, I mean, these stories were told for a reason. Sometimes they were told because the storyteller needed some money or whatever, or they were taken out of context. But if a story is published, it is fair game to use.
Yeah.
It's how it's used and how it's communicated.
What if it's written by a non-native people, non-indigenous?
Well, then go back and look at their resources and where they got the stories,
Okay.
and then go back from there. You can always do that.
Yeah.
We have this great grandfather we call Grandfather Google, and knows everything and can help now. Yeah, Grandfather Google. Yeah. Check him out. Yep.
So a couple of weeks ago, when Darren Ranko was here, he talked about some treaties that were signed back along between the tribal people and
Yeah.
And there was a lot of misunderstanding because there was a lot lost in translation.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you know, when you're telling a story that came from your native language, if it's hard to transcribe that into English, are there things lost in translation?
Oh,
when
gosh.
doing so?
Yes.
And
Humor.
Yeah.
There's a lot of humor that's lost in translation with our stories. There's embedded humor in them. And how do we survive? Through everything we've been through. We survive through laughing, through being together and just laughing and forgetting about the horrors for a minute. And a lot of the humor is lost in the translation within our stories. Oh,
The most violence that I've ever felt towards any animal was towards the woodchuck. And I can remember beating one to death inside a garden that I had fenced very carefully.
mhm,
And for years, I struggled with that anger towards the woodchuck. And then I heard two stories. One, that the woodchuck was the carrier of the fire.
mhm,
And then the other story I heard more recently was that grandmother woodchuck was the keeper of the plant wisdom for this region.
mhm.
And so it turned my whole thinking around. And I won't go into the details. I will say that in my cornfield, which is too big to put a fence around, and I noticed that the woodchuck was picking up each little sprout and eating the kernel and folding the leaf over on the ground, that I had a choice of being angry or putting up a fence or getting a gun, and I had another choice. And that choice was to ask the woodchuck for an agreement. And the agreement was, I won't hurt you. Please don't hurt my corn.
Mhm.
I'd like to hear, not necessarily tonight, but I'd like to learn more woodchuck stories.
Yeah. So and the woodchuck also was Glooskap's teacher.
I know.
Yeah, she was the grandmother that taught. And she also made the very important hunting bag that he carried from the fur of her belly. I mean, I can tell you that story too. Yeah, yeah. So these are the things that we need to understand, is that they can be a nuisance and they can harm, you know, what we're trying to do, but we can always come into some sort of arrangement, maybe arrangement like that, because it's really you know, sometimes we just need to move them away, and sometimes, you know, we need to think a little bit differently, you know. My grandfather, we had a woodchuck problem, and we kept chucking our wood. No, I'm just kidding. And you knew somebody was going to say it, but I might as well just get it out there. But my grandfather had a garden, and it was just a problem. And he tried to make an agreement with the woodchuck too, because he said, I can't eat you, and I'm not going to take your life if I can't eat you. So he relocated that to somebody else's garden. No, I'm just kidding. Down in Norrisville. But it was a Sunday drive. Yeah, a station wagon. But, you know, these are important things to understand. I like your story. That's really important. Yes.
I found it very useful for my children. I'm from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I was very good at that.
Yeah.
And my grandmother gets stories. Well, when I came up here, my children, they were very fortunate to be among the Wabanaki, and they got these stories.
Yeah.
The baby cry.
Yeah.
They got to hear all this. It really sticks with even today.
Good.
I was going to say that what you're saying you should have 5-year lecture on this. Still, wouldn't be able to cover the value of all of it.
Right. I mean, there's no way I'm going to do it in this amount of time, but thank you for sharing that, because it's really important to hear those kinds of things.
I had a woodchuck that lived underneath the deck, and then this little woodchuck came along and bullied the big one, and the big one ran away and borrowed the head heart trap from my neighbor. And I trapped the skunk.
Yeah. That's a trickster story right there. Because the woodchuck said, hey, you ever have peanut butter? Really good. Yeah. That's what happens. Everybody I know who's trying to trap, every single story I know of people trying to trap a woodchuck end up getting a skunk. Every single story. It's so funny because it's not funny, but it is funny. But it's funny in the way that it's almost like they conspire, like, to do that. I live trap squirrels all the time and relocate them across 2 bridges. Because I've never in my life seen a squirrel walking across the bridge. And I figure
You were gonna kill them.
it's true. It's true. I was gonna freeze them because
You killed one of them before.
so yeah.
I think she needs to tell some stories.
Yeah, she loves to. You're telling on me. This is like being recorded forever. All right, so I'm going to stop there because we'll take that last question here, and then we'll take the last question in the live audience here, and then if there's any more, I notice there's 8 things. If there's any more questions there, we'll take them after that. But go ahead.
So mine is just some information about trapping woodchucks. If you're worried about skunks, close the trap at night.
Because woodchucks won't go.
You get the skunks at night.
Okay, and woodchucks not at night. They're not moving at night.
I'm not going to take the risk.
Good point. Any more questions online?
There was one person asked if you could clarify the Joe Bruchak reference.
Yeah, he's not a native storyteller. He tells everybody's stories and he changes them so poorly that it diminishes the stories for native storyteller. I'm in a native, he's in native storyteller groups too. He's from a state recognized tribe, and the way in which he tells other tribal stories. If you've written Joe Bruchak, I mean, this isn't a Joe Bruchak thing, just clarifying that he changes the story so much that it takes away the spirit of the stories. And those people from those tribes that hold those stories are very disappointed in what he does. That's all I need to say.
What's his name again?
J.O. Bruchak, Bruchac or something. Yeah.
From the Adirondacks.
Yeah. Well, he's from northern Vermont, actually. And then he eventually moved over in that area. But no native storyteller that I know is pleased with what he does with their tribal stories. No tribes. Tribes have written letters against what he's doing, but it doesn't matter when you own your own press, write whatever you want. So, it's a very, when the tribes are speaking out and the tribal storytellers from those tribes are speaking out, you need to listen. And that is very well, grandfather Google can help you there too. That's very well out there. It's not a big secret, not a secret at all, unless you're not paying attention.
Get that girl home. She's so bad.
Yeah. So thank you so much for listening. And yeah, and she's been up since 4 o'clock this morning too. So.